International Journal. Bradley Worthington, heir to a banking dynasty, scoffed about his father spending $200,000 so he would never have to deal with such issues. Amanda Chun, daughter of Chinese diplomats and a straight-A student, refused, fearing the risk to her GPA, and soon only 3 remained in the 40-seat hall. The frustrated professor, his teaching assistant shuffling papers, and Kesha Johnson, 20, the daughter of a hospital cleaning lady from Detroit who had come to Harvard on a full scholarship, her calloused hands from summers in a textile factory gripping the same worn pencil she carried since high school, and while others saw only impossible numbers, she recognized her own life written into those equations. So she raised her voice and said she wanted to try, startling the seasoned professor, who with a mixture of surprise and pity reminded her it was a doctoral-level problem better left to advanced students, but Kesha respectfully insisted that he had promised publication to whoever solved it and never mentioned any restrictions. The silence stretched on for several seconds as Professor Williams exchanged a knowing glance with his assistant, the same condescending look Kesha had grown accustomed to seeing whenever she dared to enter expensive stores, apply for internships, or claim spaces where people like her were not expected to belong. And though he finally agreed, his tone carried more of a cruel challenge than a genuine opportunity as he gave her 72 hours with no extensions or excuses, while she copied down the parameters of the daunting problem. She noticed a subtle clue buried within the equations that her fleeing classmates had missed, a detail that completely altered the path to the solution, and what no one knew was that this underestimated scholarship girl had lived the very realities she was tasked to model mathematically, giving her an edge no privilege could ever buy. And as news of her acceptance spread across campus within 24 hours, WhatsApp groups of wealthy students lit up with cruel jokes and bets on how quickly she would quit. Bradley Worthington forced scoffing she wouldn't last until morning, while Amanda Chun said it was cruel to even let her try. But at that very moment, Kesha was in the Central Library until 3 a.m., not out of panic but with the same discipline that had carried her this far, working with the precision of someone who had always needed to be 10 times better for half the recognition. The subtle clue echoing in her mind as she realized it referenced community resilience factors her privileged peers would overlook but which she had witnessed in Detroit, remembering her mother Shirley's mantra, "When things get tough, we don't break, we find a way." And as dawn broke, Professor Williams entered the classroom with a false cordiality masking his doubt, fresh from a donor dinner where Kesha's attempt had been mocked, and with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he said, "Miss Johnson, I hope you've used these 24 hours to reflect on your academic limitations. There's still time to reconsider." "Thank you for your concern, Professor, but I intend to continue," Kesha replied, her firm voice contrasting with the nervous murmur spreading through the room, and what followed was a masterclass in academic microaggressions as Williams directed increasingly complex questions at her, always prefaced with sarcastic remarks about public school students and their supposed inability to grasp abstract concepts. Each condescending look and muffled laugh from classmates fueling the fire in Kesha's chest as she thought of her mother working double shifts for her books, the father she never knew whose medical bills drained their savings, and the countless rejections she had endured. And when Bradley approached during the break with a predatory smile, suggesting she quit to save face because she lacked the pedigree of family dinners filled with business talk, Kesha looked up from her notebook and with eyes so steady they made him step back, told him he was right about one thing, that she grew up in a different world, one where you couldn't afford to fail and underestimating someone was the most costly mistake. And that afternoon in the computer lab, she began weaving socioeconomic data, personal community stories, and statistics into a model that turned lived reality into revolutionary scientific knowledge, her determination forged in far hotter furnaces than any Harvard classroom. While cruel rumors and memes about her circulated through elite student groups where Bradley even planned a farewell party for her failure, Amanda claimed it would be a relief, and Victoria Ashford sneered that someone should film her breakdown for posterity, not knowing Jason Kim had quietly given Kesha access to these chats, which she now read with calm focus. Every insult not as humiliation but as proof. New data points showing that resilience wasn't an anomaly, but a survival system. And as she explained her groundbreaking theory to her mother Shirley during their 5:30 a.m. call about how marginalized communities created economic resilience ignored by traditional models, Mrs. Shirley recalled how their neighborhood adapted during the 2008 recession while banks collapsed, affirming her daughter's insight. And later that morning, Professor James Wright, himself the son of Mexican immigrants who had faced harsher prejudice years before, appeared at the library with coffee and genuine support, recognizing in her work not just a solution to the Williams problem, but a revolution in the way socioeconomic resilience could be understood, leaving Kesha certain not only that it would work, but that it could change how Harvard, and perhaps the wider world, viewed her community forever. Generations of underestimated people had prepared Kesha for this moment, and on the night before her presentation, Professor Wright asked if she was certain about going through with not only solving the problem, but also delivering it in the bold way she had planned, to which she replied that after 3 days of being treated like an anomaly, she intended to show them that the true anomaly was a system that confused privilege with competence for so long it had forgotten how to recognize real genius. And when he asked what if it went wrong, she smiled and said that at least she would fail doing something worthwhile, reminding him that she grew up where failure was not an option, and the genius they were about to witness was forged in necessity, not comfort. And as she left the library that night, she carried not just the solution to Harvard's most complex problem, but a plan that would redefine the meaning of academic excellence. So the next morning, the classroom overflowed with students, professors, administrators, and even the dean, all expecting to watch the spectacular failure of a scholarship girl who didn't know her place, while Bradley Worthington sat in the front row smirking and posting to the Harvard elite group that the show was about to begin, and Professor Williams entered with the smug air of someone certain he would teach her a lesson, telling her he hoped she had used the 72 hours to find a dignified way to admit her limitations. But when Kesha calmly connected her laptop and replied that she thought she had come up with something interesting, the first slides wiped the smile from Williams's face, for instead of mere graphs and equations, her presentation opened with a James Baldwin quote on the mathematics of oppression and unveiled a methodology that turned lived experience into rigorous scientific data, her steady voice explaining that the problem wasn't impossible but poorly formulated because it tried to measure resilience with tools created by people who never had to be resilient. And as the slides advanced, every graph, every equation, every analysis dismantled decades of flawed research and exposed the arrogance of an academy blind to marginalized communities' innovations, leaving Amanda Chun whispering in shock that Kesha hadn't just solved the problem, but had revolutionized the entire field. Professor Williams felt sweat trickle down his forehead as he realized Kesha's work wasn't just a solution but groundbreaking research worthy of the world's top journals, the kind of work that defined careers. And yet it was coming from the very student he had dismissed as an aberration. Trying to regain control, he interrupted her with a challenge about primary sources and data, but Kesha calmly revealed her trump card: empirical evidence drawn from none other than the students themselves. With Jason Kim's help, screenshots of their own WhatsApp and Harvard elite group chats filled the screen, exposing their prejudice-laced bets, insults, and dismissive comments, each one cutting through the arrogance in the room like a blade. Faces turned red, whispers died, and Professor Williams paled as Kesha explained that their behavior had provided the perfect dataset to prove how privilege creates cognitive blind spots, correlating false confidence with actual incompetence. When Williams tried to object about private conversations, Professor Wright entered carrying a briefcase and, with calm authority, exposed Williams's own misconduct, mocking Kesha at dinners with donors and undermining her publicly, before announcing that her research had already been submitted to 2 top economic journals with interest in review. The room grew heavier as Bradley Worthington tried to slip away, only for Kesha to stop him with a gentle but devastating question about methodology that left him speechless, exposed as hollow behind his elitist arrogance. The rest of the presentation unfolded like a masterclass, each slide transforming lived experience into rigorous scientific knowledge, until the dean himself cut Williams off and asked to meet privately with Kesha. As the room emptied in silence, students avoided her gaze, humbled and ashamed, while Kesha packed her materials with quiet dignity. No triumph, only the calm certainty of someone who had always known the truth. Even Victoria Ashford, who had mocked her, paused to apologize, only for Kesha to reply softly that honesty was the first step toward change and thank her for the data. What those privileged students learned that day was that true excellence is not inherited privilege, but resilience forged in struggle, and the humiliation they felt was nothing compared to what Kesha had endured in silence. In the dean's office, a 3-hour meeting sealed Williams' downfall as she lost her position and faced investigation for discrimination, while Kesha gained a full scholarship, direct mentorship from the dean, and recognition at the National Economics Congress. 6 months later, she walked the same hallway where she had once been humiliated, now as the dean's research assistant and lead author of a revolutionary paper redefining behavioral economics, embodying the proof that greatness is not measured by the cradle you are born into, but by how far you can rise beyond it. The Journal of Economic Behavior not only accepted Kesha's research, but dedicated an entire special issue to the revolutionary implications of her intersectional methodology, cementing her as a rising force in global economics. Professor Wright, now promoted to director of the newly founded Department of Applied Socioeconomic Studies, found her preparing materials for his keynote lecture at an international conference and proudly shared that applications from marginalized communities had surged 340% in a single year, as countless young people now longed to study at the university where history had been rewritten. Across academia, the story of the scholarship student who transformed systemic prejudice into rigorous science became legend, taught as proof that authentic genius outshines manufactured privilege. Meanwhile, Bradley Worthington IV was quietly nudged into transferring to a second-rate European university after nearly failing 4 core courses, his last Instagram post a hollow attempt to justify abandoning Harvard for entrepreneurial opportunities, fooling no one. Amanda Chun, shaken by Kesha's presentation, sought her out with genuine humility, admitting that she had wasted years memorizing formulas without ever grasping their real purpose, and later devoted herself to organizations using economics to fight inequality, work she described as the education Harvard never gave her. Victoria Ashford, once loud on social media, vanished completely, with whispers of therapy in a Swiss clinic for what doctors called reverse imposter syndrome, the crushing realization that all her confidence had rested on unearned accomplishments. But the greatest transformation unfolded within Harvard itself. The Kesha Protocol, an informal name turned institutional policy, reshaped admissions and faculty evaluations to prioritize transformative potential over elitist cultural fit, while entire disciplines were restructured to include perspectives long excluded. At Kesha's graduation, her mother, Mrs. Shirley, sat in the front row wearing her best dress and wept with pride as her daughter received her summa cum laude degree alongside 3 extraordinary offers: a Harvard PhD, a consulting role at the World Bank, and leadership of a new international research institute on economic equity. "My daughter," she whispered, tears flowing, "you haven't just exceeded expectations, you've redefined what excellence means." At the celebration, a shadow from the past appeared. Professor Williams, disgraced and unemployable in academia, now worked as a temporary cleaner, collecting cups while former colleagues looked away. Kesha noticed him but offered no words, for she understood the truest revenge was not humiliation, but building something so immense that her oppressors became irrelevant. 2 years later, Dr. Johnson would stand not as a survivor of prejudice, but as the architect of a new standard in global economics. Kesha Johnson published her second book, Mathematizing Dignity: How to Transform Lived Experience into Scientific Knowledge, a groundbreaking work that quickly became required reading in economics and sociology courses worldwide. Her TED Talks reached millions, inspiring a generation of young scholars from marginalized communities who finally saw their realities reflected in the highest levels of academia. But the deepest transformation was in Kesha herself. The shy scholarship student who had once raised her hand in a half-empty Harvard classroom was now a tenured professor at Stanford University at only 24, the youngest in its history, mentoring students who carried the same mix of raw brilliance and necessity-forged determination she once had. Professor Johnson, said Marcus, a 19-year-old son of Salvadoran immigrants, hesitating at her office door. "Do you have a minute? I'd like to show you an idea I had about measuring community resilience in refugee populations." Kesha smiled, recognizing the same hunger she had once carried in her own eyes. "Of course, Marcus. And call me Kesha. The best education happens when we break the hierarchies that keep us from real knowledge." Her story became living proof that true excellence is not born of privilege, but of the urgent drive to create a more just world, that the most powerful revenge is not in crushing those who underestimated you, but in building something so extraordinary their smallness fades into irrelevance. For anyone who has been doubted because of their background, color, or class, her journey was a reminder that each dismissal is fuel, and that genius knows no surname, no bank account, and no limits, only the will to turn injustice into inspiration.